Cool. Well, my name is Jason Hubbard. We have Babar from Sales Director. So I'm from SalesIntel. You want to go to our next page? Cool. So yeah, the reason why we're all here is sales and marketing has rapidly changed over the last 10 years as technology has advanced. And so the big challenge now is that salespeople are spending basically a third of their time actually selling. The other 70% of their time they're dealing with the technology solutions that we've created that supposedly make their lives easier, but in reality, it means that they're actually spending less time actually having conversations, building relationships, and sales is all about relationships. So the purpose of this webinar is to show you how to train your reps on modern relationship management, how to best employ the best relationship building techniques, because in the end of the day, sales is all about relationships. So in this webinar, you're going to learn how to identify the stakeholders and buyers that you need to actually close a deal, how to build a multi-channel approach that cuts through the noise, because with all of the channels and all the technology we have now, it's harder than ever to actually get through all of the noise and chatter and actually get in touch with people and actually build those relationships. We're going to cover the building blocks of a premium content strategy, because as all of this has emerged and the new technologies and new selling processes have changed, it's actually kind of gone back to sales and marketing 101. And so content has become king again. And then we're going to cover how to navigate contacts within the same company, because virtually no sales these days are occurring from a single buyer. There's typically at least 3 to 5 people at the table in order to make a buying decision. And so figuring out who those people are and getting all those people to the table are essential to any sort of a selling strategy. And then the last is how to use modern tools that we've talked about to actually effectively augment those relationship building plans, as opposed to what is tended in the past with these new technologies, which is kind of a spray and pray approach. So actually being strategic about it and actually using it to build relationships instead of just trying to do it through mass outreach.
All right, so let's do a few introductions here for the audience, and we'll get right into the content. Folks, I'm Babar Batla. I spent the last 15 years in enterprise sales between Microsoft and Google. Before leaving Microsoft, I ran a $200 million book of business managing a national sales team. I am today one of the co-founders of Sales Director AI. You can think of us as a conversational AI assistant that gives sales leaders a complete picture of their sales org, and it helps build Salesforce that scales. Our ultimate vision here is to essentially build out an AI-based sales manager. So these days, I spend all my time planning and training an AI system to become the greatest companion for sales organizations. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share some of the tips and tricks that I've learned through my career, but as well as engaging with our clients and learning from their best practices.
Great. My name is Jason Hubbard. Like I mentioned, I've helped to grow 3 top 100 of Inc.'s fastest growing privately held companies. Cirrus Insight was my most recent one. Came in at number 41 in the nation and number 1 fastest growing company in Tennessee in 2016. I was the first hire there, worked there for nearly 6 years as VP of marketing. But largely basically grew and built the entire front of the house over that time. Now I'm Chief Revenue Officer for SalesIntel.io. SalesIntel provides the highest quality contact data, and having the right people to reach out to with the right information especially in these days where, you know, Google and Microsoft and stuff are cracking down on, you know, that kind of spray and pray approach that I talked about, where, you know, if you don't have high delivery rates, or you're not reaching out to the right people, you're getting spam complaints, you know, all of those things that don't build relationships. Having that correct contact data, as well as the ability to be able to bring all the right decision makers to the table to accelerate a deal, and that's really what we're all about. So that's where we are with SalesIntel and what our goal is there. Great. So why are we here? So some questions to ask yourselves. You know, do you know your typical conversion rate from an open opportunity to close? Typically, it's pretty low. And how does your relationship engagement affect that? That's a lot of what we're here to talk about today, is how important those relationships are and how essential that is to get that conversion rate up. Do you know how many of your team's deals don't have the right people engaged? If you do know those numbers, then you know, how do you get those up? Reaching out through LinkedIn as an approach. So, you know, LinkedIn has become, you know, increasingly a strategy for people, but LinkedIn isn't enough. 30% of your decision makers don't have a LinkedIn profile. So LinkedIn's not going to be enough for you. Also, according to census data, 20% of your workforce changes jobs and positions yearly. So if you don't have a platform for keeping your database up to date, then you're not reaching out to the right people at the right places, at the right roles. And then always, you know, you have to keep that data updated, but that's really a you know, difficult process. And yeah, I mean, the Achilles heel, as you know, as all of you are going to know, of CRM to begin with, is trying to get your salespeople to actually update that information and use that data. Is the biggest struggle. Is the reason why, you know, CRM adoption is the biggest problem that CRM has across the board, you know, from day one till today. And then, you know, as I've said before, the shotgun approach doesn't work. You know, we've got too many channels between social, between LinkedIn, between email, between webinars, you know, across the board. The shotgun approach is just not effective. And you've got, you know, increasingly people clamping down on people's ability to do that. So like I said, you've got, you know, Google, Microsoft, you know, vastly increasing their spam algorithms, so that, you know, the spray and pray approach just doesn't work anymore.
Awesome. So let's kind of talk about the webinar approach here, guys, before we get into the content. To make the content easy and consumable and actionable, we decided to kind of share the insights and our observations broken out into 4 tips. Hope you guys find the format and the content immediately useful. We are certainly looking forward to hearing feedback and your point of view at the end of the session, or reaching out to us directly and providing that feedback. All right, so here is first tip, right? Tip number 1, don't get too excited about your initial contact. Now, before I actually share the tip here, let me provide some context of the situation. You know, most mature B2B sales orgs, they have ways to make initial contact with prospects, right? They do this via getting referrals, you know, inbound inquiries, or even using modern outbound sales development strategies. They hire sales development reps, you know, or SDRs to essentially do a systematic outreach to new contacts. And that's pretty common these days, certainly in modern sales organizations. Now, this separation of duties, right, definitely allows each role and each team to optimize for their output, right? Sales development is focused on making initial contact and qualifying, while the AE team, right, your folks that are carrying the quota, and the bag, those guys run the sales cycle to closure. Again, pretty standard these days. Now, the downside to this separation of duties and potentially this increased volume of net new relationships is that the AE team gets spoiled and frankly, they get lazy. Just think about it, right? Due to all of this steady stream of new conversations coming in without the AE doing anything, they get addicted to these new leads and they forget that the real selling begins with the initial contact. Like it's not a huge milestone. They forget that the journey has just started, or in some cases, the prospects are already in a buyer's journey and they're just kind of engaging midstream. So in reality, right, the best case is that the initial contact will be a sponsor of yours. Now, we as sellers are typically not that lucky that the initial contact is a person with the budget or the ultimate decision maker. We have to constantly remind ourselves that in B2B selling, there are typically, as Jason mentioned, more than 5 stakeholders that you have that have input into the buying decision, right? Now, if your sellers aren't engaging with those folks, it doesn't mean that those folks don't exist, right? Those stakeholders aren't there. If they're just dealing with one person, let's say, like the initial contact, and they're kind of happy with that, they're most likely just introducing risk in the deal as they're allowing somebody else, right, that potential champion or so-called champion to represent the solution internally. And you as an expert are not having the opportunity to do that yourself. So we will all agree that definitely, adds risk to the deal.
Yeah, and Babar, I can certainly see many organizations, I've seen it myself, living with this struggle. What advice do you have for sales leaders of those organizations?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll kind of break it down into 4 things. Number 1, remind your reps, no matter how short or long the buyer goes through a buyer's journey. That's number 1, right? Outside of the person, you would call a champion, quote unquote champion, there's always someone who has a decision-making authority. There's someone who provides the money, right? There's somebody who influences, and there's somebody who actually uses the product or the service or solution, right? Now, one person can play multiple roles, but these are discrete buyer personas or buyer roles that exist. So it's important as a seller for you to know who those are. Number 2, if you are a sales leader, it's your responsibility to make sure that sellers are mapping these personas for each of their deals, at least the ones that you care about, right? Because if you're not, you're essentially walking through this maze blind through the buyer's journey. Number 3, sellers can't stop prospecting when they create an opportunity, right? The journey is just starting. So you should train your sellers to always be curious about who plays what persona. Sellers should, regularly think about that. And they should ask their prospect, right? Whoever they're engaged with, on who else is playing a role in the buyer's decision. Now, there are, 2 ways of going about this. One, seller can just kind of wait to organically over time build out the map. Or other is to get educated and push the agenda forward, right? What I mean by this is, not only kind of mapping out the folks that but go out, do your research, get educated, and identify other folks that you have not engaged with that could potentially play a role, and then ask for an introduction by name, right? Go out to your existing relationships at the account and ask, right? And obviously this latter approach will accelerate the process itself.
Yeah, and to make things practical, at a tactical level, what can sales leaders do to accelerate and improve this process?
Sure, absolutely. So, tooling obviously plays a big part, right? We believe in the saying that you can't expect what you don't inspect, right? So using tools that allow you to hold the reps accountable to improve relationship management, right? Without requiring or without having too much of a burden on the rep, like unnecessary kind of low value work that they have to do, that's the key, right? Hold them accountable, make sure the tooling does not become too onerous for the rep's time. Now, I'm not saying that you should just point the seller to a tool. That's not what I'm saying. That isn't the answer here. If there is no accountability, what I'm saying is if there's no accountability, no rep is going to use a tip or a tool, right? And if things are too difficult, no rep is going to definitely use the tip that we're talking about. So make sure that it's easy for the reps. Now, keeping that in mind, we actually built our own product, Sales Director AI's relationship plan tool, which is integrated with SalesIntel's contact data source. With this AI-based relationship plan tool, and there's a screenshot on your screen here, sellers can get totally organized around the relationships that they have today around an opportunity, or new ones, without doing any data entry. They can pull in new contacts from validated contacts in SalesIntel. Managers or sales leaders can then get quick visibility into each deal's relationship plan to ensure reps are following the company's best practices. So certainly look at tools. Sales Director AI and SalesIntel's partnership definitely provides an end-to-end solution there.
Cool. And so, yeah, building on that, I've mentioned multiple times just how crowded everything is and how saturated the channels are. Because of that, you need a multi-channel approach. So some people are going to be engaged on Twitter. Some people are going to be engaged in their inboxes. Direct dials have become unbelievably valuable, but also incredibly hard to actually get, so that you can actually get a direct line to somebody. And so having a multi-channel approach, where you're reaching out to people via as many channels as possible, is essential to to selling in general, but especially during that first phase where you're trying to break in and get that initial contact, that initial reply, that initial approach. And you never know which ones that's going to be. Like I said, some people are extremely engaged in LinkedIn. I personally, if you want to reach out to me, LinkedIn is the last way you're ever going to get in touch with me. A direct dial is going to be the best way you're going to get in touch with me. Because I'm working on building a business. So if you're calling me, then I'm going to pick up the phone. Email has been absolutely saturated by the enormous growth in marketing automation. And so email is not a solution in and of itself anymore. And so all of that is to say, you need a multi-channel approach. You need as many ways to reach out to people as humanly possible. And then also, as was already mentioned, after you've made that initial contact, most likely that's not going to be your decision maker. Even if that is one of the decision makers, there's probably going to be 4 other ones at least that you're going to need at the table to make a buying decision. So use that as an internal network. So reach out to people, ask for permission to be referred to the other decision makers. Also know who those personas are, so that for instance, when I was at Cirrus Insight, I knew if we were selling into an enterprise account, we needed a director or VP of sales. We needed legal, we needed security, we needed financial. So we knew all the people that we needed to get at the table. And so we were able to ask for all of those people at the very beginning of that conversation, so that we were advancing it on all fronts as opposed to having to do it sequentially.
Awesome.
Accelerated our sales process. And it's also where tools like SalesIntel can help you do that as well. So, instead of saying like, hey, I just generically need your head of security, you can actually say, hey, I need this person. I know they're your head of security. And that vastly increases that process, but also greatly increases your legitimacy and that you know what you're talking about.
Great. So let's do tip number 3, right? How to navigate and the rules of engagement around that. Now, if you're an experienced salesperson, you know there's a big difference in the rules of engagement between initial contact and once you are in a conversation with a prospect and a company, right? There's a level of freedom that one has while prospecting prior to that being initially engaged in a conversation with somebody in the company. Now, the primary reason for this difference is that the stakes become a lot higher, right? Once a prospect gets promoted to an opportunity, and that you need that initial person, the initial contact person, to help you move the conversation forward. Now, again, average 5 contacts to kind of make a deal happen. Thus the kind of age-old debate around, well, is it okay for me to continue prospecting after starting the initial conversation with the contact? That continues to kind of surface itself. Now, you certainly have to kind of read the situation, your particular situation, and you get better with experience and make your own call there. But here are some best practices that we have learned, through our careers. Number 1, prior to initial connect and conversation, reach out to, as broad of an audience as you can have relevant conversations with, right? It's a precious time. So research as many relevant contacts as you can, include them in your sales outreach campaigns. Remember, the more folks you reach out to, obviously the higher chance of landing that first conversation. There is some sort of a conversion rate there, and you're fighting against those numbers. So it is a numbers game at that stage. Number 2, there are many, many different reasons, right? People don't respond back. They might have other priorities. The problem you are solving isn't a problem for them. It's not big enough for them to respond back or take time to engage. Or they've solved the problem that you're talking about with another solution, or your messaging isn't landing well. Now, amongst all of these different options or possibilities, there's only one that you have control over, right? Which is your messaging. The rest of them are all situational and product kind of systematic, right? So certainly prior to your initial kind of contact, try different messages, do your ABC testing, right? To see if one of them will catch their attention better than others. Third tip, or kind of third best practice. Once you make contact, right, you have to quickly determine if the person you are talking to kind of has the juice, right, to move things forward and get the right people involved. Now, sometimes you get lucky. Most of the time you don't. You don't have somebody that can influence enough people to move the conversation forward. But regardless, right, once you make first contact as a good rep, you are now building rapport and trust with your new relationship. And the last thing you want to do is have them kind of get ticked off, right? So the general recommendation here again is that you halt all outbound to other folks in the company after you make initial contact. What you now need to do is you need to move the prospect through your sales cycle, kind of aligned to their buyer's journey, and ask for introductions to the right people. Now, with that said, like any best practices, there are exceptions, and there's certainly ones here. So here are some exceptions where you don't need to halt the outreach. Number 1, your initial contact isn't a champion, and thus you're still on the hunt for one, right? So go ahead and continue. 2, your initial contact has essentially gone dark, kind of gives you a reason or kind of the go-ahead to reach out to other people in the account. 3, you asked your prospect, right, and they're fine with it in reaching out to a select few. You should certainly leverage that point of contact to get warm introductions though, right? So don't let them get off easy there. Another exception is, when you want other folks, playing a part in a buyer's journey to recognize who you are and build some brand awareness, what you can do is you can use account-based marketing techniques to accomplish that, right? Things like ads, right? They're not direct outreaches. It's actually fine to have messaging and have messages out to other players around the deal. You can use advertisement for that to increase awareness and definitely get yourself, your brand the problem space that you're focused on, the solution approach on other people's radar. And as I shared earlier, another best practice is to do your research and understand who might play the buyer's persona and ask for them by name, right? This lets the prospect know that you're on top of your game, you're top of what you're doing, and that you're experienced in selling your product.
Great, and that leads right into tip number 4. Premium value content is king today, and that goes both for the top of the funnel as well as further down the funnel. So those rules of engagement that you were just talking about, if you have premium content that's designed for those exact personas that you know that you need to get at the table, then that's an opportunity for you to, it not in a salesy pitch or, hey, I'm breaching, relationship and stuff like that, proactively reach out to those people. So like, hey, we have a case study that, directly addresses any security concerns you may have about our platform. Or we have a case study that is specific to your industry. Those are value add pieces of content that you can use to reach out to those other decision makers that you need to get in front of. And so, whether or not you have permission to do that, those are kind of what I like to refer to as non-creepy excuses to reach out to people that get them engaged and have them understand like why they need to be having a conversation with you. And then at the top of the funnel, obviously, the more that you have as incoming, the better you are. Because, outbound using, mass email lists and stuff like that, people's inboxes are inundated. People's LinkedIn profiles are inundated. So doing unfocused mass outreach is basically dead as a channel. It's ironic that I'm saying this on a webinar, but I've seen webinars as a channel die, even as value add content. I've seen, where it used to be no problem for me to get, 100 plus registrants for a webinar. That's fallen off dramatically. And then, your attendance rates, have dropped from like 50% to 25%. So you need, it's kind of back to marketing 101. You need value add content that people are going to engage with, that people are going to find. And then they're going to reach out to you inbound, because, all of the technology that we have, that's enabled outbound to accelerate and be able to do it at such a scale, has meant that it's actually become less and less effective. And so coming up with value add content that's directed at the right people at the right time, is essential these days, as opposed to, the very early days of like marketing automation where, it was just spray and pray. You knew if you threw up a webinar, you were going to get 100 people register, you're going to get 50 people to show up. And, you were going to turn, that into 10 opportunities. That's not the state of the market anymore. And so you've got to get smart about not only the content that you're creating, but making sure that you're getting the right targeted content to the right people. And that's where having, your up-to-date data being accurate is so important. Because as tools have gotten sophisticated, people have gotten more sensitive about when you miss the target. So if, a targeted piece of content that's to the wrong person at the wrong position, or especially at the wrong company, then they tend to get pretty pissed off at you. And that, not only doesn't that doesn't advance the deal, it can kill the deal. And like we've been talking about through all of this, it's all about relationship building. So when you miss the mark like that, then you've obviously killed the relationship. So yeah, you've got to keep yourself organized. You've got to make sure that you have the right content. and that you're targeting it at the right people, and that it's actual value add content and not just sales pitch content. But yeah, like I said, marketing has kind of gone back to marketing 101, ironically, because of all of these technologies and tools that we have.
Awesome. All right, so let me do a quick recap, guys, and we'll take some questions here. So tip number one, right? Don't get too excited about your initial contact, right? Stay curious and on a hunt for who plays what role in the buyer persona. Tip number two, right? You need a multi-channel approach. There's just way too much noise in the market, and you have to attach or attack from various different angles, right? Tip three was all about the rules of engagement prior to first contact and after. It states that, go broad on direct outreach prior to initial contact, and then leverage indirect channels once you are in a sales cycle. Tip four stated that, have premium content mapped to personas and make sure the content is getting to the right people.
Cool. It looks like we have a question from Chris. I can take it. Definitely have feedback on that. And then if you want to add on, I can do that as well. But the question is, how do you solve the problem of people hiding behind their voicemail so they don't answer their phone and let all calls go to voicemail? So several things to that. One, have your pitch and have your ask prepared, so that as you leave that voicemail, that it's actually pertinent and they actually understand what you're doing and why they should be interested. And so that means that you need to be doing at least the bare minimum of research on who you're calling, what your value add proposition is to them, and why they should be interested in picking up the phone call the next time. The second is employ a multi-channel approach. So I have my SDRs as they're working through a campaign. They've got different phases. So, they'll do a phone call with a voicemail. Then they'll do outreach via LinkedIn. Then they'll do an email. Then they'll do a phone call without a voicemail. And so it needs to be multi-channel, multi-stage. You can't just do a single phone call and voicemail, because you've got to get their attention and make sure that they understand why they want to have a conversation with you. And so, if you do get that voicemail the first time, you need to have, a multi-channel approach and a targeted approach so that whenever you make that phone call, the second or the third or the fourth time, that, they're actually going to pick up and know who you are and why they want to have a conversation with you.
So Jason, the only thing that I will add to it, right? So if they're hiding behind the voicemail, there are certainly either, checking those voicemails or they are checking other channels. As Jason mentioned, right, you should have a multi-channel report approach. But at the end of the day, what is important for you to answer for the prospect is why me, why now, right? If you don't answer those two questions in the first 10 seconds, you're going to lose those folks, even in a voicemail. You have to answer for them, why are you reaching out to them and why are you reaching out to them today? And it can't be about your product, right? Yeah. It has to be something about their situation. It has to be something about happening around them, some market change or something of that, some undeniable change happening in the market are good examples, right? But for somebody who's receiving a cold outreach, the first thing that comes to their mind is why is this guy calling me or gal calling me, and why are they disturbing me right now? And if you can answer those two questions, you most likely, right, you will most likely have an opportunity there for them to continue listening to your voicemail or reading your email.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. If you can't answer those two questions, even if they pick up the phone, you're not going to make progress on it.
Right.
So whether you're leaving it on a voicemail or you're doing a quick pitch to an actual person that picked up the phone call, if you're not answering those questions and you're not prepared for those, then you're not going to be successful, no matter, whether it's a voicemail or an actual, somebody picking up the phone.
Wonderful. Hey, Jason, we are like pretty much overtime. We had this for 30 minutes. We're at 10:39 Pacific. So let's just kind of conclude the webinar here, guys. Thank you very much. I'm sure some of you guys have follow-on questions. You can certainly contact us, our respective companies on our website. So it's SalesIntel.io and it's salesdirector.ai. I'll kind of go back to the original slide here and leave it there for a couple of minutes if you want to, pull up our names. So SalesIntel.io and SalesDirector.ai. There's a contact us obviously form on both of those sites. Please leverage that to reach out to us. We'd be happy to kind of answer any questions, as well as kind of show you how our integrated solution can help you improve and instill modern relationship management techniques in your organization. So again, thank you very much. Have a good rest of the week, and we will see you next time on our webinars.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.